There was a night when the world held its breath. The spotlight dimmed, the stage went dark, and somewhere between the hum of a city and the silence of a prayer, a voice that once moved millions simply disappeared. Before that silence, his sound could baptize you in desire. That slow burn, that velvet ache, they said when Teddy Pendergrass sang. Even the air learned how to love. He didn't chase fame, fame chased him. Women would whisper his name like a secret only the moon could hear. Men studied his tone, his calm, his thunder. But every gift comes with a weight, every light with a shadow. And when his voice was taken from him, what remained was not the applause but the question. Who is a man when the music ends? In the 70s, he was the king of soul's temptation. By the 80s, he became the symbol of strength in silence. This is the story of Teddy Pendergrass, the man who rose from prayer, burned through pleasure, and fell into stillness, only to find himself again. Because some legends don't fade. They echo in every heart that ever needed a song to survive. He came into this world already carrying his mother's prayers. Philadelphia, the 26th of March 1950. Etta Pendergrass had lost 6 children before him. 6 little souls she never got to hold. So when Teddy arrived, she said he wasn't her 7th child, he was her answered prayer. But miracles don't come easy. His father, Jesse, left before Teddy took his first breath. And by the time Teddy turned 12, Jesse was gone for good, stabbed to death by a friend. Teddy only saw his father twice in his entire life. Once to remember him, once to forget. His mother took him to church, week after week, until the sound of gospel became his language. He was barely 2 when he climbed onto a wooden chair, singing his first song in front of the congregation. The church clapped. He didn't know why. He only knew that sound could move people, and that somewhere inside the music was the feeling of being seen. By 10, he was ordained a young minister, his voice already deeper than most grown men's. But when he heard James Brown shout, when he saw Jackie Wilson command a stage, he realized the pulpit wasn't the only place to preach. Soul music could save too. It could heal the streets that gospel couldn't reach. Philly was rough in those days. The corners were hungry, and the gangs were louder than the hymns. Teddy drifted for a while, running with the wrong crowd, spending nights in juvenile lockup after a robbery he didn't commit. He called it a test, one of those divine interruptions that remind you who you are not. When he came out, he followed his mother to the restaurant where she worked. That's where he met the sound of rhythm again, not from a church organ, but from silverware clinking against plates. He learned to play drums without sticks, just his fingers tapping tables, listening for a beat only he could hear. Soon he joined local groups, small clubs, forgotten bars. He recorded a song called Angel with Muddy Feet, and it went nowhere. But failure didn't frighten him. He was used to starting over. He said once, "If you've already survived loss, rejection just feels like noise." Then came the moment of collision. Harold Melvin, veteran of an old doo-wop band, heard Teddy playing drums for the Cadillacs. He saw what others missed. The posture, the presence, the quiet fire in his tone. Melvin didn't just hire him. He gave him a place to belong. And so began the story of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, a group that would change R&B and change Teddy forever. He was still behind the drums then, his voice waiting for its turn. But even when he wasn't the one singing, you could feel him in the room, like a storm before it breaks, like a prayer before it's answered. He started behind the drums, half hidden by cymbals and smoke. But the night he opened his mouth to sing, every head in the club turned. It wasn't just a voice, it was gravity. Harold Melvin heard it first. He saw how the audience leaned forward, how the women stopped moving, how silence turned into surrender. From that night on, Teddy Pendergrass was no longer the drummer. He was the sound. With Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, he carried the pain of the city into melody. Songs like I Miss You and If You Don't Know Me By Now didn't just play on radios, they lived in people's kitchens, their heartbreaks, their hope. Every lyric felt like a confession whispered into the dark. But behind the music, something heavier brewed. Harold Melvin controlled the money, The name, the power. The group's success carried his name, but it was Teddy's voice the crowd came for. And every night, as applause shook the stage, Teddy felt that invisible hand tightening around his pride. He wanted freedom, not fame. Freedom to sing his truth without permission, to own the sound that God gave him. So he walked away, left the blue notes, left the comfort, and risked everything for his name. Teddy Pendergrass, a name that would soon burn across billboards, radio charts, and the hearts of millions. When his first solo album dropped in 1977, it was more than platinum, it was prophecy. I don't love you anymore. The whole town's laughing at me. Every track felt like the story of a man unchained. By his second album, he wasn't just a singer, he was a symbol. A storm in silk, the man women fantasized about, and men secretly admired. On stage, he turned concerts into ritual. Rose petals, red lights, chocolate lollipops handed to women in the crowd. He'd whisper, "Turn off the lights," and the room would melt. Thousands of women, of every race, screaming his name as if it could save them from loneliness. They called him the Black Elvis. They called him the Teddy Bear. But what he really was a mirror showing America its hunger for intimacy, for tenderness that didn't apologize. Teddy sold out arenas, 5 consecutive platinum albums, and every note dripped with authority. He made vulnerability sound like power. He made masculinity sound gentle. But fame in Philly came with enemies. Cops harassed him. Mobsters followed him. Even Marvin Gaye accused him of stealing his style and his woman. Every spotlight cast a shadow, and Teddy's was growing darker. Still, when he stepped to the mic, the world forgot the rumors. All they heard was redemption. All they saw was a man who turned pain into rhythm. He once said, "You can't fake soul. You have to live it." And in those years, Teddy wasn't just living soul, he was defining it. The velvet storm had arrived, and no one, not even Teddy himself, was ready for the silence that would follow. Philadelphia, March 18th, 1982. The air was soft at night, the kind that smells like perfume and pavement after rain. Inside a silver Rolls-Royce, Teddy Pendergrass was finally alone. The club lights still echoed in his mind. The laughter, the perfume, the way the crowd sang his lyrics back to him, every word like a promise. Beside him sat Tamika Watson, a performer he'd just met, her laughter light as the music on the radio. Teddy was driving fast down Lincoln Drive, the same road he'd taken hundreds of times. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't careless. He was just tired, the kind of tired that follows men who have spent their lives giving everything away. Then, without warning, the car began to shake. A scream of metal, a flicker of light, and then nothing. The Rolls slammed into a guardrail, spun, and crushed into 2 trees. No screech of brakes. No time to pray. The city, for a moment, went silent. When paramedics arrived, the air smelled of gasoline and smoke. Tamika was crying, trapped but breathing. Teddy wasn't. His head leaned against the leather seat, his chest still, his fingers open, as if reaching for something just out of reach. It took nearly an hour to cut him free. In the hospital, the white lights were too bright, too clean for a man who had lived on stage lights and rhythm. When he woke, he tried to move first his hand, then his legs, but nothing answered. The world felt far away, muffled like sound underwater. The doctors spoke in careful tones. Spinal cord injury, paralysis from the chest down, quadriplegic, words that did not belong to the man who once commanded thousands with a whisper. At first, he didn't cry. He just stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of hospital machines, keeping time where his heartbeat once led the rhythm. Then came the pain, not physical, but the kind that settles in the throat, the kind you can't sing through. He asked the woman he loved, Karen Still, to end it. He wanted silence, a silence deeper than any stage could offer. But Karen said no. She held his face in her hands and whispered, "You are still here." And for a long time, that was the only truth he could bear. Days turned into months. He learned to breathe without panic, to speak without bitterness. Every breath became an act of defiance. Every note he hummed beneath the hospital noise was a declaration that something inside him still refused to die. Outside, the world was cruel. Rumors spread about Tamika, about secrets, about sins. They said the accident was his punishment. They said it was karma. But Teddy said nothing. He had learned that silence could speak louder than defense. When the nurses turned off the lights each night, he'd stare into the dark, hearing faint echoes of applause that weren't really there. And in that stillness, he began to rebuild himself, not with muscles, but with memory. He remembered the church, the wooden chair, his mother's voice, the way faith had always found him in the dark. By the time they wheeled him out of the hospital 6 months later, he was no longer the man who had walked in. He was slower, quieter, but unbroken. The world called him paralyzed. He called it a rebirth, because when you lose everything, even your body, and still find the will to sing, that's not tragedy. That's resurrection. There are moments when silence is louder than music. And when Teddy Pendergrass rolled onto the stage at the Live Aid concert in Philadelphia, July 13th, 1985, the silence that greeted him wasn't emptiness, it was reverence. Nearly 3 years had passed since the accident. 3 years since the crash that took his movement, but not his voice. 3 years since the man once called the Black Elvis disappeared from the lights. And now, beneath the summer sun and the eyes of nearly 100,000 people and millions more watching across the world, he returned. The crowd didn't cheer at first. They gasped. There he was, sitting in his wheelchair, dressed in white, calm, fragile, powerful. A man who had lost everything, yet somehow brought with him a presence larger than before. As the camera zoomed in, you could see the tremble in his lip, the tears he refused to hide. The applause began slowly. A wave, then a storm. Not because of fame, but because everyone in that moment knew they were witnessing courage made visible. When he spoke, his voice was quieter now, but deeper, as if every word had traveled through pain before reaching air. He didn't need to sing that day. He just needed to show up. And he did. That alone was a kind of song. After Live Aid, the industry that once doubted him began to open its doors again. Asylum Records gave him a chance not out of pity, but out of respect. He recorded Love Language in 1984, his first album since the crash. And within it, a young, unknown voice, Whitney Houston. Together they sang Hold Me, a song about finding safety in love, even when the world breaks you. The track climbed the charts, and the world heard Teddy again, not as a victim, but as a survivor. For the rest of the decade, Teddy kept creating, not chasing hits, but meaning. His 1988 album Joy lived up to its name, reaching #1 on the R&B charts. He no longer sang to seduce, he sang to remind. To remind people that strength isn't the absence of pain, but the will to keep singing through it. Offstage, he poured his energy into something even greater. The Teddy Pendergrass Alliance, a non-profit organization he founded in 1998 to support people with spinal cord injuries. He gave his time, his story, his name, turning his own suffering into a roadmap for others. For every fan who once screamed at his concerts, there was now someone whose life he quietly changed. He had become something rarer than a star. He had become a light, steady, unshowy, impossible to put out. When people asked him how he survived, he'd smile and say, "You don't stop living because the music stops. You find another way to dance." And somehow, in his stillness, Teddy Pendergrass taught America that true soul wasn't about how high you could sing, but how deep you could feel. By the time the 90s came, Teddy Pendergrass had learned to live inside the quiet. He no longer chased the lights, he carried his own. Each morning, he would wheel himself to the window of his home in Philadelphia, look out at the city that had given him both his rise and his ruin, and whisper, "Thank you." His voice had changed. It was softer now, touched by time, but every note carried the weight of a man who had been broken and rebuilt by faith. He released more albums, not for fame, but for peace. Every melody was a letter to the past, to the fans, to the God who never left him even when his body did. In 1998, he founded the Teddy Pendergrass Alliance, a foundation that helped people with spinal cord injuries reclaim their independence. He visited hospitals quietly, without cameras, sometimes just to sit beside a patient who couldn't speak. He didn't need to offer advice. He was the advice proof that survival is an art. When he talked about his life, he didn't hide the pain. He spoke of the loneliness, the lawsuits, the rumors, the nights when he still heard applause in his sleep. But he also spoke of grace. He said, "I thought I'd lost my purpose, but maybe my purpose was never the stage. Maybe it was the silence." And in 2009, the doctors found colon cancer. Another battle, another test. He fought quietly, like he had done everything else, without complaint, without bitterness. He went through surgery and smiled through recovery, but his body was tired. On the 13th of January 2010, in a Philadelphia hospital, Teddy Pendergrass took his final breath. 59 years old, a singer who could no longer stand but never fell. When the news broke, radio stations across America played "Turn Off the Lights" one more time. And for a few sacred minutes, every city, every living room, every heart that ever swayed to his voice fell silent. It wasn't grief, it was gratitude. He left behind songs that still breathe love, TKO, joy, close the door, but more than that, he left behind a map. A map of how to live with dignity when life takes away everything you thought defined you. At his funeral, friends said it felt less like mourning and more like remembering light. They spoke of the way his laughter filled the room, how he called everyone baby, how his eyes still danced even when his body couldn't. And somewhere, in the echo of that gathering, you could almost hear him whisper, "Don't cry, just listen." Because that's the thing about soul. It doesn't end when the song fades. It stays in the breath, in the pause, in the people who keep remembering. To anyone who has ever lost something they thought they couldn't live without, Teddy's story is a hand reaching back through time, saying, "You can still sing, even from the silence." Some stories end in applause. His ended in grace. And maybe that's the highest note any man can reach.